Act 1, Birth of a Hunter. Chapter 1, The Last Client. The rain in the city didn't wash things clean. It just turned the grime into a slick, iridescent oil that clung to the heels of Raven's boots. She sat on the edge of a moth-eaten velvet chair in room 412 of the Starlight Motel, watching the neon sign outside flicker. Starlight, Starite, Star. Her client, a man named Miller with hands that smelled of expensive scotch and cheap desperation, was in the bathroom. Raven checked the time. 3 minutes left on the clock. She was 24, but in the harsh, flickering amber of the room, her eyes looked ancient. She had spent 3 years perfecting the art of being invisible while standing right in front of people. When the bathroom door opened, the air changed. It wasn't the sound of a man finishing a business transaction. It was the heavy, rhythmic thud of a predator finding its footing. Miller didn't look at her with the usual glazed-over shame. He looked at her like she was a puzzle he intended to break. "You're quiet tonight, Raven," he said, his voice a low grate. He didn't sit. He moved toward the door and turned the deadbolt. Click. The sound echoed like a gunshot in Raven's chest. Her survival instinct, usually a dull hum, screamed. She stood up, smoothing her skirt, her voice steady despite the spike of adrenaline. "Time's up, Miller. I have another appointment." "No, you don't," he whispered. He lunged. The struggle was a blur of shadows and silver light. Miller was stronger, fueled by a dark, surging entitlement. He threw her against the vanity mirror. The glass didn't just crack, it exploded. A web of fractures blossomed behind her head, and for a second, Raven saw 1,000 versions of herself, small, jagged, and sharp. As he choked the breath from her, Raven didn't feel fear. She felt a cold, crystalline clarity. Her hand drifted to the floor, fingers closing around a large, triangular shard of the mirror. With a precision she didn't know she possessed, she drove it upward. The weight lifted. The red mist cleared. As Miller slumped away, clutching his throat, Raven stood over him. She looked at her reflection in the remaining piece of the mirror on the wall. The girl who had walked into the room was gone. The woman standing there was someone new. She didn't call the police. She picked up a single shard of glass, tucked it into her pocket, and walked out into the rain. Chapter 2, Vanishing Act. The police report for the incident at the Starlight Motel was filed under John Doe assault, but the victim, or rather, the aggressor, wasn't talking. Miller survived, but his silence was bought by his own high-profile crimes. As for the woman, she was a ghost. Raven returned to her apartment, a cramped studio that smelled of lavender and damp wood. She didn't pack a bag. Packing implied she wanted to keep something. She stripped her life down to the essentials: cash, a burner phone, and a newfound sense of purpose that felt like a cold blade in her gut. She stood over her sink and chopped her long, dark hair into a jagged bob with kitchen shears. She dyed it a flat, matte black that absorbed the light. She burned her ID, her social security card, and a photograph of a mother she barely remembered. The smoke rose in a thin, gray ribbon, curling toward the ceiling. By dawn, Raven was gone. She didn't take the bus or the train. Too many cameras. She walked until her feet bled, then hitched a ride with a trucker heading north. In the precinct, Detective Mara Quinn stared at the crime scene photos of room 412. Something bothered her. It wasn't the blood or the violence, it was the mirror. Every piece of glass had been accounted for except one. A single, palm-sized shard was missing. "Who are you looking for, Quinn?" her partner asked, leaning over her shoulder. "I don't know yet," Quinn muttered, tracing the empty space in the mirror's frame with her pen. "But I don't think she's a victim. I think she's a runner. And runners eventually find a place to stop." Raven didn't stop. She spent the next 3 months moving through the gray spaces of the country. Homeless shelters, basement gyms, and library computer labs. She learned how to pick locks. She learned how to track digital footprints. She learned that power wasn't something you were born with. It was something you took from those who didn't deserve it. Chapter 3, Reborn. The city of Oakhaven was a mirror image of the one she'd left. Grittier, perhaps, with more alleys and fewer lights. It was the perfect hunting ground. She was no longer Raven. She was the smith, a name as common and invisible as a shadow. She lived in a loft above a shuttered laundromat, the walls covered in news clippings and printed dossiers. Her clients had changed. She no longer sold her time. She sold justice, though she didn't use that word. Justice was for the courts. This was surgery. Her first target was a man named Arthur Vance. To the world, he was a charming recruiter for a high-end modeling agency. To the girls he lured into his private sessions, he was a nightmare. Raven watched him from the shadows of a coffee shop across the street. She watched the way he touched his watch, the way he scouted for the girls who looked the loneliest. She felt a familiar chill. It was the same look Miller had given her in room 412. She spent weeks studying his routine. He liked the gym at 6 a.m. He liked his coffee black. He liked to walk through the park after dark to clear his head. On a Tuesday, under a sky heavy with the threat of snow, Raven followed him into the park. She wore a heavy gray coat and a clinical, detached expression. In her pocket, she felt the weight of a small, velvet pouch. Inside was a piece of glass, polished until the edges were like razors. She wasn't the girl in the motel anymore. She was the one who held the mirror. And today, Arthur Vance was going to have to look at himself. Chapter 4, The First Shard. The park was a skeleton of oaks and iron benches, silvered by a thin layer of frost. Arthur Vance walked with the stride of a man who owned the air he breathed. He was humming a light, operatic tune, his breath blooming in white puffs. He didn't hear the soft crunch of snow behind him until Raven was less than a yard away. She didn't use a gun. A gun was too loud, too impersonal. She used a collapsible baton, a heavy snap of steel that connected with the back of Vance's knee. He collapsed with a choked cry, his face hitting the frozen earth. Before he could scream, Raven's boot was on his neck, pinning him to the dirt. "Arthur," she whispered. Her voice was a flat, terrifying monotone. "Do you remember Elena? The girl from the bus station? She's 19. She still wakes up screaming because of you." Vance thrashed, his eyes bulging as he caught sight of the dark, hooded figure looming over him. I don't know what you're—" "Lying is a waste of your final minutes," Raven interrupted. She reached into her pocket and pulled out the velvet pouch. She didn't kill him, not yet. She dragged him toward the frozen duck pond, where the ice was thin and dark. She forced his face toward the glassy surface. From her pouch, she produced a jagged shard of a mirror. She held it so he was forced to see his own terrified, weeping reflection. "Look at yourself, Arthur. Really look." When the police found him the next morning, he was alive but broken, his career and reputation systematically dismantled by an anonymous tip sent to every major news outlet in the city. Tucked into his breast pocket, resting right over his heart, was the mirror shard. It was a silent, razor-sharp calling card. The hunter had arrived. Chapter 5, Jonah Creed Watches. Jonah Creed lived in a basement apartment that smelled of ozone and old newsprint. The walls were a mosaic of digital screens and physical maps, connected by the obsessive geometry of a man who didn't trust the official narrative. He was 32, with the sallow skin of someone who rarely saw the sun and eyes that moved too fast. While the rest of Oakhaven saw a string of unfortunate accidents involving local predators, Jonah saw a masterpiece. The Shard Killer, the tabloids were calling her. Jonah hated the name. It was too crude. He preferred the reflection. He sat at his desk, the blue light of his monitor reflecting in his thick glasses. He had been tracking the Vance case for days. He'd hacked into the police database to see the crime scene photos. Most people would see the blood. Jonah saw the angle of the mirror shard. It was placed with artistic intent. It wasn't just a signature, it was a philosophy. "She's not a killer," Jonah whispered to the empty room. "She's a mirror. She shows them what they are." He began to cross-reference the locations. The motel, the park, the gym. He used traffic cam footage, filtering for a specific height, a specific gait. He looked for a ghost. And then, in a grainy 3 a.m. feed from a bodega 3 blocks from the laundromat, he saw her. A woman in a gray coat. She didn't look at the camera, but she didn't hide from it either. She moved with a terrifying, rhythmic purpose. Jonah felt a jolt of electricity. He wasn't scared. He felt, for the first time in his life, like he was looking at his other half. Chapter 6, The Approach. Raven knew she was being followed. She'd known for 3 days. The follower was amateurish. He stayed too close. His heart rate was probably visible through his shirt, and he smelled of nervous sweat. She led him away from her loft, winding through the industrial district where the warehouses groaned under the weight of the wind. In a narrow alleyway behind a decommissioned shipyard, she stopped. She didn't turn around. She waited. "You're making a mistake," she said, her voice echoing off the brick walls. Jonah stepped out of the shadows, his hands raised, though they were shaking. "I'm not the police, Raven, or whatever you're calling yourself now." The use of her old name hit her like a physical blow. She spun around, a knife appearing in her hand, as if by magic. In one blur of motion, she had him pinned against a rusted dumpster, the blade pressed against the soft skin beneath his jaw. "How do you know that name?" she hissed. I tracked the Starlight Motel files. The missing shard. The missing girl," Jonah wheezed, his eyes wide but filled with a strange, frantic light. "I'm Jonah Creed. I've been waiting for someone like you. Someone who actually does something." Raven looked at him, really looked at him. He was a mess of neuroses and tech-obsessed loneliness. He was a liability. But as she saw the sheer amount of data he had managed to gather on his own, a cold, calculating thought crossed her mind. She needed eyes in the digital world. She pulled the knife back an inch. "If you ever follow me again, I'll give you a mirror of your own to look at. Do you understand?" "I want to help," Jonah pleaded. "I have the files. I have the next 3 targets mapped out." "You're good, Raven, but I'm the one who can make you invisible." Raven stared at him for a long beat. She didn't smile. She just flicked the knife shut. "Rule 1, you stay in your basement. Rule 2, you never use my name again." Act 2, the partnership. Chapter 7, the deal. Raven's loft was a tomb of silence until Jonah Creed began filling it with the hum of high-end processors. She had allowed him entry into her inner sanctum, not out of trust, but out of a cold necessity. He sat at a folding table she'd cleared for him, his fingers dancing across a custom-built mechanical keyboard. "I've scrubbed the bodega footage," Jonah said, his voice brimming with a desperate need to impress. "And I've set up a ghost loop on your street's municipal cameras. To the city, this sidewalk is empty for the next 12 hours. Raven stood by the window, her silhouette sharp against the gray morning light. She didn't look at his screens. She looked at a printed photograph of their next mark. "I don't care about the cameras, Jonah. I care about the rules. If you deviate from the plan, if you contact me outside of our encrypted channel, or if you look into my past beyond what you've already stolen, I vanish, and you'll find out exactly how sharp those shards are." Jonah swallowed hard, the click of his keys pausing for a heartbeat. "I understand. We're partners." "We are a partnership of utility," Raven corrected, her voice like cracking ice. "You are the eyes. I am the hand. There is no we beyond the work." She watched him. He looked at her not with fear, but with a terrifying kind of worship. To Jonah, Raven wasn't a person dealing with the wreckage of a shattered life. She was a protagonist in a story he finally got to write. It was a dangerous delusion, but for now his data was clean. He pulled up a map of the city's diamond district. "Target confirmed," Jonah whispered. "Marcus Thorne, nightclub mogul, philanthropist, and according to the hidden drives I pulled from his cloud, a systematic monster." Chapter 8, the hunt begins. The nightclub was called the Prism. It was a palace of glass, chrome, and thumping bass, a place designed for people to lose themselves. Marcus Thorne stood on the VIP balcony, surveying the crowd like a king overlooking a fiefdom. He was a man who believed that enough money could drown out any scream. Raven moved through the crowd wearing a backless silk dress that hid the thin, reinforced wires and the glass shard sheathed against her thigh. In her ear, a microscopic bud hissed with Jonah's voice. "Thorne is moving to the back office. He's alone. Security is on a 2-minute rotation." Jonah's voice was tight with adrenaline. He was back in his basement miles away, but Raven could hear the frantic drumming of his fingers. "Stay calm, Jonah," Raven breathed, weaving through the dancing bodies. "I'm fine. This is incredible. You're right there. You're about to. Quiet." Raven slipped through the service door. The transition from the roar of the club to the vacuum stillness of the executive hallway was jarring. She moved with the silent, predatory grace she had spent months perfecting. Her heart rate didn't climb. She wasn't an amateur seeking a thrill. She was a shadow performing a task. She reached the office door just as Jonah clicked the electronic lock from his remote terminal. Inside, Thorne was pouring a drink. He turned, a charming smile already forming on his face, expecting a different kind of visitor. The smile died when he saw Raven's eyes. They weren't the eyes of a victim. They were the eyes of a debt collector. Chapter 9, Detective Mara Quinn. Detective Mara Quinn sat in a pool of fluorescent light at the 4th Precinct, surrounded by cold coffee and a growing sense of dread. On her whiteboard, she had pinned photos of Miller, Vance, and now, a grainy shot of a mirror shard recovered from a freak accident at the Prism. She's escalating, Quinn muttered, rubbing her temples. Her partner, Miller, no relation to Raven's first client, leaned against the doorframe. Or she's just getting started. Forensics says the glass from the club is an exact match for the motel mirror from 6 months ago. She's carrying pieces of her own trauma around to leave at the scenes. It's poetic in a sick way. It's not poetic, Quinn snapped. It's a manifesto. She isn't just killing or hurting these men. She's exposing them. Every one of these guys has a history of sealed NDAs and disappeared. Jane does. Quinn walked up to the board and circled the space between the crimes. Look at the tech. The security at the Prism was bypassed by a high-level digital intrusion. Our girl isn't a hacker. She's a street survivor. She's found a partner. She picked up a red marker and drew a jagged line connecting the motel to the nightclub. Find me the link. Find me the person who's been sniffing around these files. Someone is watching her watch them. And that's where we'll catch her. Quinn looked at the photo of the mirror shard. In its reflection, she saw her own tired eyes. She felt a strange, forbidden tug of empathy for the hunter. But her job was to stop the bleeding, no matter who was holding the knife. Chapter 10, Jonah's High. Back in his basement, Jonah Creed felt like a god. The adrenaline from the Prism job hadn't faded. It had mutated into a restless, itchy sense of superiority. He sat in the dark, watching the news reports of Marcus Thorne's sudden legal complications and mysterious injuries. He played the audio recording of the mission over and over. He loved the sound of the silence, the way Raven moved, the way she didn't speak unless necessary. But more than that, he loved the sound of his own voice directing her. I'm the architect, he thought, his fingers twitching. She's the building, but I drew the blueprints. He started staying up for 48 hours at a time, fueled by energy drinks and the intoxicating hum of the dark web. He began to post anonymous, cryptic riddles on vigilante forums, hinting at a new reflection coming to the city. He wanted the world to know there was a mind behind the shard. She doesn't realize how much she needs me, he whispered to his wall of monitors. He began to imagine them as a duo, the ghost and the glass. In his head, he wasn't just a technician anymore, he was her equal. He started carrying a small pocket knife, practicing the way Raven flipped hers open, though he nearly cut his thumb twice. He wasn't just watching the hunt. He was becoming addicted to the kill. Chapter 11, Raven's Code. Raven found Jonah in the loft 3 days later. He was disheveled, his eyes bloodshot, pacing in front of a new map he'd printed. It was a list of names. Men who owed back taxes, men who were known for bar fights, men who were simply shady. I found the next 3, Jonah said, his voice frantic. We can hit them all by Friday if we move fast. Raven walked over to the map and tore it off the wall with a single, violent motion. No. What? These guys are scum, Raven. Look at this one. He's a tax evader, Jonah, Raven said, her voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. He's a greedy coward, but he isn't a predator. My code isn't about cleaning up the city's ledger. It's about the girls who have no voice. It's about the men who use power to shatter lives. We don't hunt scum. We hunt monsters. She stepped into his personal space, her presence cold and suffocating. You're losing the thread. This isn't a game and it isn't a hobby. If we target someone who doesn't fit the profile, we become the very thing I'm trying to destroy. Do you understand? I am the judge here. You are the research department. Jonah bristled, his ego bruising in real time. I'm the reason you didn't get caught at the club. I'm the one who. You're the one who is currently one mistake away from being left behind, she interrupted. She turned her back on him, but her hand stayed near her waist. She could feel his resentment like heat coming off a radiator. Chapter 12, A Close Call. The target was a corrupt city councilman named Holloway, a man who used his position to pressure female interns into silence. The plan was simple. Jonah was to loop the dash cam of the councilman's private car while Raven confronted him in the parking garage. But Jonah was distracted. He was trying to record the audio for his archives, fiddling with a secondary recorder while trying to maintain the hack. Raven, wait, Jonah hissed into the comms. The loop isn't holding. Give me 10 seconds. I'm already in position, Jonah. The guard is turning the corner. Loop it now. Jonah's hand shook. He clicked the wrong window. Instead of looping the feed, he accidentally cut the power to the entire garage. The lights went out, but so did the electronic locks on the emergency exits, triggering a silent alarm at the precinct. Damn it, Jonah. Raven bolted. She didn't have time for the shard. She saw Holloway's confused face in the dark, but she heard the distant wail of a siren. She vaulted over a concrete barrier just as a patrol car swung into the garage entrance. She had to scramble up a fire escape, her breathing ragged, her heart hammering against her ribs. She made it to the roof, disappearing into the shadows of the skyline, but it was too close. Way too close. When she got back to the loft, Jonah was already there, looking like a scolded dog. It was a glitch, he started. The software. Raven didn't say a word. She walked up to him and backhanded him across the face. The sound was sharp, like a breaking mirror. That was your first warning, she said, her eyes burning with a terrifying, calm light. There won't be a second. If you put me in a cage because you wanted to play hero, I will make sure you're the one who stays in it. Chapter 13, Quinn's Breakthrough. Detective Mara Quinn didn't believe in coincidences. She believed in the weight of evidence. On her desk sat a physical map of the city, but instead of pins, she had placed small, adhesive mirrors at each crime scene. As she adjusted the desk lamp, the light bounced off the tiny surfaces, casting jagged reflections across the room. It's not just a signature, Quinn whispered to the empty office. It's a literal reflection of the crime. She had spent the last 48 hours cross-referencing the glass shards. The lab had confirmed they weren't from a hardware store. They were vintage, silver-backed, heavy, and decades old. Specifically, they were consistent with the type of mirrors used in mid-century motels. She pulled the cold case file from the Starlight Motel. There, tucked in a dusty folder, was a detail everyone had missed. The room had been rented to a woman using a stolen ID, but the physical description matched a Jane Doe who had vanished from the system years ago. You're not a ghost, Quinn said, her finger tracing a blurry CCTV still of a woman in a gray coat. You're just someone who learned how to hide in plain sight. Quinn turned to her computer. She stopped looking for a killer and started looking for a victim who had stopped being one. She filtered for every domestic assault, every accidental fall, and every hospital admission involving women in the last 5 years where the perpetrator was never charged. The list was long, but one name stood out because the file was nearly empty, purged of details. The incident at the Starlight. The victim had been listed as unidentified, but the man she'd fought back against, Miller, had connections to a high-level security firm. She didn't just run, Quinn realized, her pulse quickening. She went to school, and she's coming back for the top of the food chain. Chapter 14, The Ghost from Before. Raven sat in the dark of her loft, the shard of the Starlight mirror pressed against her palm. It was the only piece she hadn't left behind, the mother shard. Her laptop chimed. It wasn't Jonah. It was an encrypted alert she'd set up years ago, keyed to a specific name, Elias Thorne. Elias wasn't just Marcus Thorne's older brother. He was the man who had paid Miller to quiet her at the motel. He was the architect of her original ruin, a man whose power reached into the veins of the city's judiciary and police force. He was the reason Raven had to die so that the Smith could be born. The alert was a news clipping. Elias Thorne returns to Oakhaven for Global Security Summit. The air in the room felt suddenly thin. Raven's hand trembled just a fraction. For months, she had been hunting the lesser monsters, convincing herself she was preparing. But the truth was a cold, hard knot in her stomach. She was terrified. Elias wasn't a nightclub owner or a councilman. He was a wolf who owned the woods. She pulled up the floor plans for the summit. It was a fortress, armed private security, biometric scanners, and layers of surveillance. She couldn't do this alone. She looked toward the door, thinking of Jonah. She hated his ego. She hated his instability. But he was the only bridge she had to the digital heart of Elias's empire. Jonah, she said into the comms, her voice cracking for the first time. I'm here, he answered immediately, his voice thick with a mix of resentment and hope. Forget the councilman. Forget the small fry. The man who broke the mirror is back in the city. We're going after Elias Thorne. There was a long silence on the other end. Then, Jonah's voice came back, lower, darker. I've been waiting for you to ask for help with the big one, Raven. I've already started the deep dive, but this time we do it my way. Raven felt the trap closing, but she didn't know if it was Elias's or Jonah's. She just knew she had to walk through it. Act 3, Fractures. Chapter 15, Jonah's Jealousy. The atmosphere in the loft had shifted from clinical to claustrophobic. Jonah didn't just want to help anymore. He wanted to own the mission. As Raven obsessed over Elias Thorne's security protocols, Jonah watched her from the corner of his eye, his resentment festering like a wound. You're distracted, Jonah said, his fingers clicking rhythmically against his desk. You're making this personal, Raven. That's when people get sloppy. That's when people get caught. Raven didn't look up from the blueprints of the summit hall. It is personal, Jonah. That's the point. Elias isn't just a target, he's the source. And what am I? Jonah's voice rose, a shrill edge cutting through the hum of the servers. I'm the one who found the back doors into Thorne's private server. I'm the one who's kept the police off your back. But you look at me like I'm a tool. Like I'm a piece of glass you can just drop when you're done. He wanted her to deny it. He wanted her to say she needed him, not for his code, but for him. Instead, Raven finally looked at him, her eyes as vacant as a winter sky. If the tool stops working, Jonah, I replace it. Focus on the encryption. Jonah turned back to his screens, his face flushed a deep, angry red. He didn't see a partner anymore. He saw a queen who needed to be reminded who provided her crown. Deep in a hidden partition of his hard drive, he opened a file he'd been building in secret. A map of Raven's movements, her real name, and the location of the loft. He wasn't going to let her leave him behind. If he couldn't be her hero, he would be her architect of ruin. Chapter 16, Quinn Shadows Jonah. Detective Mara Quinn had traded her blazer for a nondescript hoodie and her department car for a rusted sedan seized in a drug bust. She sat 3 blocks away from the laundromat, watching the man she'd identified as Subject B. Jonah Creed was not a professional. He was twitchy, constantly checking his reflection in shop windows, and he walked with the frantic energy of someone who thought they were the lead in a spy movie. Got you, Quinn whispered, watching through binoculars as Jonah entered a 24-hour electronics store. She had tracked his digital signature after he'd made the mistake of bragging on an encrypted forum, a breadcrumb trail of ego that led straight to his ISP. She didn't move in for the arrest. She knew Jonah was the thread, Raven was the needle. She followed him to a park where he sat on a bench, typing furiously on a ruggedized laptop. Quinn stayed back, blending into the joggers and dog walkers. She noticed the way he kept looking at a specific high-rise, the Thorne Global Security Headquarters. You're not just hacking him, Quinn realized, her instincts sharpening. You're baiting him. She saw Jonah pull a burner phone from his pocket, dial a number, and speak for less than 10 seconds before snapping it shut. He looked terrified, but also strangely satisfied. Quinn made a note of the time. She didn't need a wiretap to know what he was doing. He was selling out the only person who had ever seen him. Chapter 17, Raven's Plan. Raven sat alone in the dark, the mother's shard of the mirror resting on her knee. She was crafting an elaborate trap, a digital and physical pincer move designed to strip Elias Thorne of his anonymity before the world's press. The plan required Jonah to trigger a massive data leak at the exact moment she bypassed the physical security of the summit's green room. It was a symphony of timing. The leak will broadcast the motel security footage directly to the main stage screens, Raven explained, her voice low and steady. Every world leader, every journalist will see exactly what Elias Thorne is. He won't just go to jail, he'll be erased. And you? Jonah asked, his back to her. What happens to you when the footage plays? Your face is in that video too. I'll be gone before the first frame hits the screen, Raven said. I've already burned this identity. I have a new one waiting in Montreal. Montreal. The word hit Jonah like a physical blow. She was leaving. She hadn't even invited him. She was going to discard him like a used battery. Right, Jonah whispered, his eyes fixed on a blinking cursor. The plan is perfect, Raven. It's exactly what he deserves. As Raven walked into the back room to prep her gear, Jonah opened a secure chat window. He wasn't messaging a forum. He was messaging a private security handle, e.thorn_sec. I have the ghost, he typed. Tonight, 11 p.m., the old shipyard. Don't bring the cops. Just bring the check. Chapter 18, Jonah's breaking point. Jonah sat in the dark, the blue light of his monitors washing over his face like the glow of a funeral pyre. His heart was a frantic bird trapped in a cage of ribs. He had spent his whole life being the guy in the background, the one who fixed the glitches, the one people ignored. Raven was the first person who had ever made him feel like part of something monumental, yet she treated him like a peripheral device. Montreal, he spat, the word tasting like copper in his mouth. He looked at the digital dossiers he'd compiled. He knew things about Raven that even she had probably suppressed. He knew the way her breath hitched when she saw a silver sedan like the one Elias used to drive. He knew the exact frequency of her gait. He had weaponized his obsession, and now, feeling the cold sting of her impending departure, he decided that if he couldn't have her as a partner, he would have her as a trophy. He hit enter on the final encrypted message to Elias Thorne's security chief. He wasn't just giving up a location. He was providing a tactical exploit. He told them about the back entrance to the shipyard, the blind spots in her thermal goggles, and the specific frequency she used for their comms. You're not leaving me behind, Raven, he whispered, his eyes filling with tears of rage. We're going to stay in this city forever, one way or another. Chapter 19, The Betrayal. The meeting with Thorne's representative was supposed to happen at a neutral site, a 24-hour diner on the edge of the district. Jonah arrived with his laptop tucked under his arm, expecting a handshake and a bank transfer. He imagined a world where Elias Thorne thanked him, where he became the lead security architect for a billionaire. Instead, when he stepped into the back of the diner, he didn't find a businessman. He found two men who looked like they were carved out of granite. They didn't offer a chair. One of them took his laptop. The other grabbed him by the throat and slammed him against the wood-paneled wall. Where is she? The larger man asked. His voice was a low, terrifying rumble. I gave you the coordinates. The shipyard. 11 p.m. Jonah wheezed, his legs dangling. The money, we had a deal. The man laughed, a sound like grinding stones. Elias Thorne doesn't make deals with rats. He uses them to find the nest. They dragged Jonah out the back door and threw him into the trunk of a black SUV. As the lid slammed shut, Jonah realized the horrific truth. He hadn't become a player in the game. He had simply handed the hunter over to the wolves, and he was nothing more than the bait they'd used to keep her in place. He was trapped in the dark, surrounded by the smell of spare tires and gasoline, finally understanding that in Raven's world, there were no heroes, only survivors and the dead. Chapter 20. Raven walks into the ambush. The shipyard was a graveyard of rusted hulls and screaming gulls. The fog had rolled in from the bay, thick and tasting of salt, turning the industrial lights into sickly yellow smudges. Raven moved through the shadows with the confidence of a ghost. She had her kit, the wires, the baton, and the mother shard tucked into a sheath on her forearm. Jonah, I'm at the perimeter. Status on the feed, she whispered into her comms. Silence, only the static of the wind. Jonah, respond. Still nothing. Raven froze, her back against a shipping container. Her instinct, sharpened by years of living on the edge, flared. Something was wrong. The air was too still. The silence wasn't the absence of noise. It was the presence of a predator holding its breath. She reached for her burner phone to kill the connection, but a voice crackled through her earpiece, not Jonah's. It was a voice she hadn't heard in years, yet it haunted every dream. "You always did like the dark, Raven," Elias Thorne said. The voice was smooth, cultured, and utterly devoid of mercy. But shadows only work if you're the only one in them. Floodlights snapped on, blinding her. The shipyard was suddenly as bright as a surgical theater. Raven squinted, her hand moving toward her waist, but she stopped. 20 yards away, standing under the hoist of a rusted crane, was Elias Thorne. He looked exactly the same, expensive wool coat, silver hair, and eyes that saw people as property. And next to him, kneeling in the dirt with a gun to his head, was Jonah. His face was bruised, his glasses shattered. When he saw Raven, he didn't look away. He looked at her with a terrifying, pathetic hope. "I'm sorry," Jonah sobbed. Raven didn't look at Jonah. She looked at Elias. She was trapped, surrounded, and outgunned. But as she felt the weight of the mirror shard against her skin, a cold, familiar calm settled over her. She had walked into an ambush, yes, but she hadn't come alone. She had brought the truth. Act 4, Collision. Chapter 21, The Turnaround. The floodlights were blinding, but Raven didn't blink. She stood in the center of the kill zone, her hands raised slightly away from her sides. Elias Thorne stepped forward, his shoes clicking on the damp concrete. "You spent months breaking my associates, shattering my interests," Elias said, gesturing to the men with rifles flanking him. "All for a bit of glass and a grudge. Did you really think a pathetic little man like Jonah was your shield?" "I didn't need a shield, Elias," Raven said. Her voice was steady, projecting over the wind. "I needed a conduit." Jonah looked up, blood dripping from his lip. Raven finally locked eyes with him. "Rule 1, Jonah. I told you I'd vanish if you looked into my past. But I didn't say I wouldn't use yours." Raven pulled a small detonator from her sleeve, not for explosives, but for a signal burst. She pressed it. "The moment Jonah accessed your private security servers to sell me out, he triggered a worm I planted in his hardware weeks ago," she explained. "Every file he stole to impress me was actually a carrier. While you were busy capturing us, your entire financial empire was being uploaded to the International Press Gallery and the FBI Cybercrime Division. It's not a leak, Elias. It's a flood." Elias's phone chirped in his pocket, then his security chief's phone. Then the sound of a dozen tablets and devices erupted. The mother shard wasn't just glass. It was the key to the encrypted drive Raven had been filling for years. She had used Jonah's betrayal as the final bridge to bypass Thorne's firewalls. Chapter 22, Quinn arrives. The silence of the shipyard was shattered by the rhythmic thwump-thwump of a helicopter and the distant, wailing scream of sirens. Detective Mara Quinn didn't wait for the SWAT team. She blew the gate in her rusted sedan, fishtailing into the light with her service weapon drawn. She saw the standoff, Thorne, his hired guns looking at their phones in panic as their offshore accounts froze in real time, and Raven, standing like a statue amidst the chaos. "Drop the weapons." "Police," Quinn yelled, taking cover behind her car door. Thorne's lead merc looked at Elias, then at the sound of the approaching sirens. He knew the difference between a high-paying job and a sinking ship. He lowered his rifle. "It's over, Elias," Quinn shouted. "We have the data. We have the motel records. We have everything." Raven looked at Quinn. For a fleeting second, there was a spark of recognition, a mutual understanding between the woman who followed the law and the woman who had to break it to survive. Then, Raven turned her gaze back to Elias. The man who had once been a god was now just a frightened old man in an expensive coat. Chapter 23, Jonah Falls. In the chaos of the arrests, Jonah Creed tried to run. He scrambled toward Raven, reaching out as if she might still save him, as if they were still the partners he had envisioned in his head. "Raven, I did it for us. I made it bigger," he shrieked. He didn't get 5 feet before Quinn's partner tackled him into the salt-stained dirt. Jonah's glasses flew off, sliding across the concrete until they hit Raven's boot. "You didn't do it for us, Jonah," Raven said, looking down at him with a pity that hurt worse than her anger. "You did it for the reflection. You wanted to see a hero in the mirror, but you never bothered to look at the man holding it. As the officers zip-tied Jonah's hands, he began to weep, a hollow, desperate sound. He had sold his soul for a seat at the table, only to realize the table was being burned for firewood. Quinn walked over, her gun still leveled at the remaining mercenaries, watching as Jonah was dragged toward a transport van. He wasn't a mastermind. He was a shard of a person who had finally shattered. Chapter 24, The Legend Begins. By the time the smoke cleared and the last of Thorne's men were processed, Raven was gone. She hadn't stayed for the accolades. She hadn't stayed to testify. She had slipped into the dark waters of the bay and vanished before the perimeter was fully closed. In the weeks that followed, the trial of Elias Thorne became the most watched event in the country, but the star witness was a ghost. The story of the mirror hunter began to spread. In women's shelters, in break rooms, and in the quiet corners of the internet, the myth grew. They whispered about a woman who left shards of glass as a warning. They talked about the Broken Mirror Club, a name the media coined, but the survivors claimed as a badge of honor. Detective Quinn sat in her office, looking at the empty spot on her whiteboard where Raven's photo used to be. She picked up a small shard of glass, the one recovered from the shipyard, and turned it in the light. She knew she should be hunting her. But as she saw the news report of a dozen more predators being arrested based on Raven's leaked data, she placed the shard in her desk drawer and locked it. Some cases were better left unsolved. Chapter 25. A New City, a New Name. 2,000 miles away. The rain fell just as hard, but the air smelled of cedar and salt. In a small apartment overlooking a gray harbor, a woman sat at a desk. Her hair was longer now, dyed a deep, natural chestnut. She looked at a new passport on the table. It didn't say Raven. It didn't say the Smith. It was a name that belonged to a woman with a future. She opened a small velvet pouch and poured its contents onto the desk. There were no shards left. She had left the last piece of her past in the shipyard, buried in the shadow of the man who had tried to break her. The laptop in front of her hummed. A message popped up on a secure, anonymous board. My name is Sarah. My boss follows me home every night. The police won't help. Please. The woman stood up and walked to the mirror in the hallway. She looked at her reflection. It wasn't jagged. It wasn't broken. It was a weapon. She picked up a fresh piece of glass, a small pocket mirror she'd bought at a corner store. She tucked it into her jacket, turned off the light, and stepped out into the rain. A new mission. A new reflection. The end.